Welcome to Gather for Her. We are so excited to have you here with us this morning. We gather weekly on Wednesday mornings for our conversations. In my welcome, I always like to acknowledge where I'm hosting from in this virtual world. And I'm deeply grateful to be hosting from my home on the Sunshine Coast, which is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish First Nation. And I'd love for you to reflect where you're joining in from. I'm fortunate enough to be hosting the conversation with a quad of my closest and dearest friends who walk this very interesting journey together of life with me and make it so joyful and curious and meaningful. And that's what we hope to just experience, share with you as an experience today in the next 60 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to my co-host to introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce our guest today.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Tina O here on this very stormy, first stormy day. It feels so beautifully perfect from this woman who loves the mythic landscape. I come to you today from Nahuelachum, which is also known as Bowen Island. It's on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish people. And it's an honor to be listening here with you today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Benty, and once again, I am very excited about this conversation, as I am about all of them. I'm joining you from Golden, which is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and the Shuswap, and I work as a performance coach for elected officials. So for those of you who don't know me, and so this conversation I'm quite excited about, and I'll probably dig into why I'm excited about it later on. So welcome to all the new faces that have joined us, and of course those who have been here on an ongoing basis. We're thrilled that you're here. I know I get so much, my own wisdom is expanded every time, and I'm deeply grateful for that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Marshall, and I'm here on the traditional territories of the Snuneymuxw and Snuneymuxw First Nations, the Coast Salish people of Vancouver Island. And I am here as the graphic recorder. And so I'm excited to be here today, and I am excited to see we have new faces. So excellent. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
So every week we gather, and we started it at the beginning of the pandemic. We really wanted to intentionally gather to share and explore the collective wisdom that we were meant to hear at this time through intentional, deliberate conversation. And our theme this fall is Ready for More. And last week, we kicked off the conversation with Ready for More Rest with Dr. Shannon Waters, an Indigenous physician on Vancouver Island. And the natural segue for me after that conversation, and I couldn't wait to hear if Dawn was available, but the natural segue was Ready for More Recovery. And I will give Dawn an official welcome, and I would like to frame the conversation to start off with. I believe that we're actually living in a society right now where we're deeply in need of recovery as a society. And my good friend Christina said the other week to me, the wound is leading. It's kind of like the tail is wagging the dog, feels like sometimes. So I always love to find a leader, and for those that know me well, once I find you, it's like very likely that I will not let go of you, because I'm deeply attracted to powerful women that I can learn from and with. And Dawn is one of those women. We've known each other and of each other for many years, and it's meant to be that we're to come closer together at this time. Dawn Nickel is the founder of She Recovers Foundation, with a mission to connect, support, and empower women who are in or seeking recovery. And She Recovers Foundation is a global grassroots movement that's currently consisting of more than 325,000 women who are in or seeking recovery from substance use disorders or behavioral health issues and life challenges. And that's what we're going to dig into today. Good morning, Dawn, and thank you so much for being here this morning.
Oh, Charlene, I'm just really touched and excited to be here. I feel like I'm coming home in a way, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But we are a global organization, and since my daughter Taryn and I started She Recovers back in 2011, so much of our efforts have been on in the United States, and we do retreats in Mexico and Bali, and so we've really done a lot of international work. And in the past couple of years, Taryn and I have been very intentional about coming home to community, staying home more. Thank you, pandemic, for that, and that only, maybe. But so yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be here, and especially because the bottom for me in my addiction took place on the Sunshine Coast. I hit a hard bottom with being a binge user of cocaine, pills, marijuana, alcohol. I had 2 young children, and I had not been a daily user since my first pregnancy, but I still suffered with the disease of addiction. And so after a number of years, when my oldest daughter was 6, and Taryn, now the co-founder of She Recovers, was 2, I hit a bottom in a cute little A-frame house on the ocean in Roberts Creek. And at the time, I was in an abusive relationship with somebody. It was intimate partner violence. We made a living through drug dealing. I won't get into too many details of that because I don't know if I can still be arrested. I hope I can. And I just, I'd had enough. I'd had enough for a really long time. But for so many of us who whether we're dealing with substance use or trauma, codependency, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, grief, loss, burnout, love or sex addiction, other abuses, I think that there comes a time in our lives when we just say, not this, or this is enough, or now's my time. And so July 21st, 1987 was my time. And I went to treatment in New Westminster. And it hasn't been a clear road. It's been bumpy because, of course, once I stopped using the substances, the trauma and all the things that were the real issues started to come to the surface. And I realized that the drugs and the promiscuity and the, really abnormal behaviors that I had exhibited from the time I was about 14, they were actually my coping mechanisms. They weren't so much the problem as the solutions to my pain, to my wounds. I love, Christine talking about the wound is healing. So over the past 33 years, I've just really devoted myself to my recovery, and it's looked like a lot of different things. It looked a lot like 12-step recovery for many years. I still consider myself a member of 12-step recovery, although I don't attend and I'm not really too involved in it. She Recovers believes that there are many pathways and that we get to develop our own patchwork of recovery from wherever and whatever we want to pull from. And we criticize nothing. We criticize nothing that works for you. I'm currently writing a book called She Recovers the Practice, and it's about kind of inviting women to create their own practice of recovery through pulling from different pathways, creating their own patchwork. I guess what I want to say about my own story is just that whatever I've ever done, and it was originally, really unhealthy relationships, including violent relationships. It was the drug dealing, participating in illegal behaviors, and of course, all the substances. It was just my way of numbing, hiding, and ignoring what was true for me. And what was true for me was trauma, and what was true for me was self-loathing, and all those things were true for me. But the real truth that I was numbing and hiding was, that I'm a pretty kick-ass woman, and I was a pretty kick-ass girl. And, that was probably as scary for me to recognize in my recovery as had been all the issues that I can name off. I can tick all the boxes about what was wrong for me. So we have this beautiful set of intentions and guiding principles that I think you've shared with some, at least members of your team. And it's a set of 10 intentions and guiding principles that really is about inviting women into their own process of recovery, their own process of healing, right? Healing is recovery. Recovery is healing. In 2011, I hit the wall with I would say my last, but it may not be, my latest or last addiction, and that was workaholism. And what had happened to me is when I got into recovery and I left the husband that beat me and found a nice one who's upstairs right now, and kind of got my life together, focused on raising my children in a healthier household. I did a whole bunch of things. I went back to university. I was a high school dropout at 16. I went back to university. I stayed for 13 years. I got a women's studies degree, a women's history degree, and a PhD in healthcare policy. And so that 13 years really primed me for becoming a workaholic. Any of you who have done graduate work, I mean, there's just nothing to do but study. It seems like your life is taken over. So at the end of that, when I did go to work, I was working in the provincial government for 6 years. I was teaching at the University of Victoria, and I had my own consulting business. And I went crazy, stark raving crazy from workaholism, hit another bottom. And again, started a process of recovery. Only this time I made the decision that I wanted to focus more on women in recovery and how we recover, and how recovering from workaholism is not that different from recovering from any of the other things that I'd recovered from. Started a Facebook page called She Recovers. It now has 270,000 followers. We started doing retreats. If you go to our website, you'll see all that we're up. It would take me literally an hour to tell you all that we're up to. I like to say I'm no longer engaged in the practice of workaholism, but I did learn how to be really, really productive, and that part stays with me. So I'm just delighted to be here. And again, I just really feel like, Charlene, I've said this to you before, but when I think about that really broken young woman, 27 years old, with these 2 little kids, and I was, I'd look at them and go like, where did you come from? And what was I thinking that I could have children? And, looking at this man who was so brutal to me, and thinking, I must be doing something to deserve this. And when I think about her to where I am today, 60 years old, and a part of this amazing community of so many women, we meet twice daily on Zoom. I just feel so blessed and really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to my co-hosts because we tend to dig in, and I always want to hear what they most heard coming through. I just want to reflect quickly back, 33 years you've walked this journey, and it's something that you've been devoted to. You're modeling every day this practice. And what I love is that, I think this coming home that you referred to also means us coming together as powerful women. And, there are parts of your story that I definitely resonate with. And I've never been a substance abuse, addicted to a substance. However, there's parts of your story I definitely resonate with. And we've talked about that. So everything that you said, we're here to learn and share and grow together, and we're more powerful together. So thank you. Christina, I'd love to kick off with you if you don't mind, and Tina and Sharon, what one piece today, just after fall equinox 2020, most hit you on the head about Dawn joining us today?
Well, again, there's so many things. One of the things that I thought was really relevant, and that is around the word trauma, right? And that it was actually trauma that was leading the way and leading the addictions. And so finding ways to buffer and numb the trauma. But what I think is really interesting and I'm curious about is around the whole idea of socially acceptable addictions and those that aren't so socially acceptable, right? And I wrote a piece recently on my own experience, my own journey with alcohol, and it's interesting because it was a socially acceptable level of drinking, and yet for me, it had a hold on me, and I needed to, and my body told me to let it go. And so, what I'm curious about is when you're working with women and you're having those conversations around that that gray line between knowing what's got a hold of you and what doesn't, I'd love to hear more about that, and how, what's that tipping point, because it's different for every woman.
I want to just add to that real quick, Dawn, if I may. And I want to bring it in almost to the mythic path, if you will, on the equinox place, as a space of moving from one place to another place. And because what I heard in this was very much where Christina's going about the acceptable addictions, and even that maybe even hesitancy to put the word addiction on it because it's so acceptable. And I'm wondering, you said this sentence about that while you've put down the practice of workaholism, productive stayed with me. And when I think of this space of walking from one world into the next world, and then this question of Christina, I wonder if you might help us understand the delicateness or fierceness of the passage between one world into the next as we put things down.
Well, very interesting questions, and I love this, very provocative, and I like thinking about these things. I'm really lucky in that I can almost always refer back to one of our 10 intentions and guiding principles to answer anything anybody ever asked me about. But one of them is that we feel really passionate about is we don't have to hit rock bottom to pursue recovery in any area of our lives. We believe in early intervention. So I want to say to Christina, and what I find most hopeful really about the recovery movement today, I know there's a lot of things, but one of the most hopeful things I find is that because women are recovering out loud, which is another one of our intentions and guiding principles, women are being invited, and others as well, not just women, anybody who identifies as a woman, men as well, are being invited to reflect upon, as an example, their drinking. And they're being permitted, giving permission to say, this is my bottom. Like, my bottom might just be, I remember one woman not very many years ago telling me that, phoning me very upset, and she said, I've got to stop drinking. I said, what's happened? Because she was so distraught. She said, oh my God, I blacked out for the first time last night. And I was like, if that's what your barometer is for it's time to change, I celebrate you. That's amazing. I did not tell her that I blacked out for the first time and for the next 15 years every time I drank, because it didn't matter. That was her line in the sand, right? And I think that that's the beautiful thing about that end of it. We get to say when we want to heal, when we want to recover, when we want to start the process. And then Tina, to you, throughout the process, as we're going along, we get to make all these decisions about ourselves and where we're at in our recovery. And we get to say, I'm moving into a new season in my recovery. You know, I've done that with 12-step, right? I kind of went, I have a new season now. I'm going to take what I learned there. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to love it. I might go to meetings once in a while, mostly when I'm in Mexico, because they go for tacos afterwards. But I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to pursue spirituality, and I'm going to, you know, do a lot more of other things. And so at any kind of point along the process, along the journey, we get to say, this is a new season for me. And that can be, this is a new season and I'm going to start. That can be a new season and say, you know, where we say, I'm going to change. That can be a new season and say, you know, and I encourage this for some women, that it can be like, I'm tired of healing. I'm just going to live for a while. I'm going to stop working. I'm going to stop working at it. I'm just going to hang out and be who I am and not give up on the lifelong seeking, but just take a little break from the work of healing, because it can be so exhausting, especially for those of us with trauma.
I think that that's actually really important, particularly for those of us who are constantly on a path of seeking and elevating and pursuing our personal growth and expansion. And there's a fine line between it being a to-be list and a to-do list, and getting away from the to-do list and letting it be. So I love what you just said, and it reminds me of the fact that live in your diamond. There is at your core, And you talked about this actually at the beginning, right? That you're not your trauma, right? You're a kick-ass girl, and that's the diamond, right? And so seeing ourselves and letting ourselves be in the diamond, and owning that our trauma doesn't define us. And that's a challenge I would put out to everybody, right? Be in your diamond self.
So great. So great. Sharon, I just before we move on, I wondered if you had any reflections. What kind of came up for me, you and I have been talking about equinox and seasons. And I was wondering if anything came up for you in this first part of the conversation, if anything jumped out for you.
Well, yeah, the season. So this time of the year, it's time to be thankful for, it's harvest time. It's time to be thankful. And it's also a time to start thinking about moving forward and starting anew. To me, the word trauma just keeps coming up. And then from an Indigenous lens, I think of trauma a lot, and being an Indigenous woman and dealing with my own recovery. And, and I just wonder, Dawn, if you, your organization, if you have any, your recovery tools, does any of them include anything Indigenous-like? And, I haven't really spent any time on your website to delve into what you offer, but I'm just curious.
Thank you, Sharon. And I do realize I meant to also, I put it in the chat, but I also meant to say that I'm calling in from Victoria, the traditional territories and unceded lands of Lekwungen and Housatonic people. So I'm glad to be here. And this year as a foundation, we just received our charitable foundation in April, and it's a US charity at this moment. We are actually this week applying for a Canadian charitable status. And what we have always been we've tried to be diverse. My daughter Taryn, who is younger, she's 35, and so I always look at She Recovers, as the founders, like I'm the older, wiser. I'm not traditional, I'm not conservative. I'm a little whack as well, but she's witchy. And she's very drawn to Indigenous learnings and teachings, as I have been as a Canadian historian, So a lot of the work that Taryn does is very much trying to tap in and learn from. Last night she did a fall equinox ceremony, I don't know what she called it, a ceremony on our Facebook page, where she was just inviting reflection on the fall equinox. And so what happened this spring was, as an organization that has always thought we worked pretty hard at trying to invite diversity, is we recognized in the aftermath of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders in the United States that focusing on diversity and equity was like jumping the gun even for our organization. That we had to really do some serious anti-racism work within our community, for our community, and within ourselves before we could move to a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So to that end, we've actually developed a series called Critical Conversations, and the first one that we're hosting is in October, and it's going to be healing the effects of racism for Black women in recovery. Another one in the series in the coming months will be healing the effects of racism for Indigenous women in recovery.
Wonderful.
And then, other various, what we have termed critical conversations. We also have one of our coaches, an African-American woman, is developing anti-racism training that we're going to make available. It's going to be mandatory for our board, for our volunteers, and for all of our coaches. We have over 100 She Recovers coaches.
Wow.
So we're kind of implementing the structure right now. What we're very sensitive to, Taryn and I both, and I have been through my whole life, is wanting to borrow and to integrate with and to collaborate with Indigenous women, and also be very cautious about co-opting tools that are not ours. So what I really love, and what Taryn's intention is really to, get back. We live in British Columbia, for heaven's sakes. Is there any place on earth where there are more amazing Indigenous women to have these conversations with? I think not. So she went on a little road tour this summer, actually, and she's got a podcast series coming up with about 4 or 5 Indigenous women that she interviewed around healing and recovery.
Excellent.
So we don't have the tool. The tool that we have is trauma-informed yoga, a program that Karen developed and teaches, and she teaches yoga teachers to be trauma-informed.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, I know we certainly see ourselves at PowHERhouse as a bridge and a bridge builder. And that's one of my biggest intentions with our team is bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous women together. I really do think that that's one of the pieces of my story. And I wanted to dive into a bit of a video that we shared. I won't play the video because it's like 12 minutes long, but we shared it with our audience prior to the session. And I really hope that some very tangible takeaways, some real ahas. I really do hope a few things, pennies drop through the next part of our conversation. And it was an Elizabeth Gilbert video where she talked about the marathon that we are currently in, that we find ourselves. And of course, as someone that has always loved sports and athletics, I loved all her analogies, and I was like, I can't wait to just dig into these analogies. And Dawn, I wondered if you would kick it off, and I'm hoping that we can all kind of, and invite the chat to open up as well. I'm wondering if there was a piece of that video or part of an analogy around the marathon that feels really relevant for you about where we're at as women in 2020 and this marathon that we're looking at, and how does our own recovery for our own sustainability and resiliency. I know Elizabeth Gilbert ended the video with, I need to keep myself healthy so that I can be there for others. And I know that that's the lens of, of which you live and lead in your life. I wondered what most came out for you watching that video.
Well, I can tell you hands down, it was, I was gobsmacked when Liz Gilbert admitted that she'd stopped drinking 18 months ago. I don't know Liz, but I know her booker. We've talked for years about having her at a She Recovers event, and the timing has never worked out. But and so I do have some background on Liz as well, and many of you will know perhaps as well that her partner, who passed away a couple of years ago, was in recovery, heroin addiction recovery. So Liz knows about addiction, and I was most struck by just the fact that she was so gently, and just the way she kind of dropped that in there, which to other people you might, but to those of us in the recovery community, like, it's like, whoa, one more on our team, right? And such a superstar. But I think the way she talked about it, she talked about sobriety or recovery being a practice. Spiritual presence, I believe, is a real requirement right now during this marathon. And I'm just never, ever present when I'm under the influence of either an addictive behavior or a substance. And so that's for me. She talked about putting down drinking, putting down using substances, and using people. Which I thought is always just so interesting when people are able to reflect there. And so the idea of practicing emotional, spiritual, and physical sobriety right now is just really what struck me as, obviously it's something that I've been trying to do for many years, but to have her, as she's such a leader, and people look up to her so much, and for the power of her being able to do that. So, I have some ideas, and I think the final question, I can go into kind of what my own plan, what my own self-care plan is for this next while. But that's what really affected me most, was just her so humbly saying, drinking was keeping me from being my best self and being present, and so now I've stopped.
I'd love to swing it over to Christina, because it's just quite a and sorry, T, and then it just fits right in with Christina and something that she's recently walked through in her own life and with her network, her sphere of influence. And I think, I'll bookcase that with someone is watching. Someone is watching. And I think as powerful women, whenever somebody talks to me, I say, the women that I run with and yes, most of the time, you know, we do run. It is a marathon. The women I run with, they have a sphere of influence of at least 2,500 women, at least. And most of them, it's more like 5,000 or 10,000. And so I want you to stop and just think about it for a minute. And yeah, there's 30 women on this call. But if you exponentially add up our sphere of influence and our ability to collectively change a trajectory, just let that drop for a minute, and then we'll come back to why this conversation is powerful. Christina, tell us a little bit about your recent experience. I just love the story.
Okay, can you give me a clue as to which are you?
She's like, which story? Christina recently wrote a post.
Okay.
That literally blew up on social. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wrote a post about my own journey, and it was interesting because the post came through me rather than like it was written for me. I was the conduit, but it felt like it was written through me for not only me but for others. And I wrote a post about my own journey of just letting go of alcohol over the last year. And it was I talked about the fact that it wasn't that I wouldn't have considered myself an alcoholic, but it was my journey with alcohol and how it was starting to impact my life, and the fact that I needed to shed it because it was no longer serving me. And so I wrote this post, and but what was fascinating is how it blew up. The number of people that reached out, sent me messages and said, this resonated with me. Now I'm exploring my relationship with drinking. And you put it in such a non-judgmental way that I could actually start asking some questions. Is alcohol having an impact on my life? And what was really fascinating was just the number of private messages ranging from there was a bit of defensiveness, which was interesting because I didn't write it in a way that would have invited defensiveness, and including my kids. So my son, and I was sharing this with Shar, my son reacted actually. He's like, Mom, you weren't an alcoholic. You made it sound like you were an alcoholic. I'm like, did you read the post, buddy? Because it didn't. And he was upset and reacted to that. And so it was interesting, the range of reactions from people. But what was most fascinating to me was just the volume of private messages and texts and phone calls that I got, and invitations to have a conversation about, I'm really interested in exploring my own relationship with alcohol. And I want to say one thing about my own journey, and that is I just started asking myself, going back to the marathon, it's really hard to run a marathon when you have a big backpack full of stuff. And what I have found is that what's required of me at this time is to start shedding the stories that don't serve me, the things that don't serve me, the relationships that don't serve me, that it's a letting go of so many things that that are not needed in this, particularly in this new reality.
I think you're my segue, Christina. I think you're the bridge because, so Dawn, in the work I bring to the world, I'm devoted to the land of myth. Not myth as in lies, things we make up, which is what we think myth is, but to this space where there are no answers. But in the storytelling and myth, it's what it really draws on is, what are we ready to hear right now? And I'm wondering if you can speak to kind of the space that Christina brought up, because Christina's story really answers that I was ready for, therefore I did, right? And she followed that, but I want to name what you said about buffering, and I want to name like why we cope, and I want to name that trauma is real. And how might you, what would you say to a woman who's asking herself, what am I ready for? Because overwhelmed, like when we remove our buffers, there's a reason the buffer's there. So how might you help us feel safer in answering that question of what we're ready for?
Yeah, and I was just kind of writing that because that was what was coming up for me as well. And I would just invite you to get curious and to not make any declarations or decisions. And labels don't matter. Like in She Recovers, labels don't matter. Abstinence doesn't matter. You know, you don't have to, you just kind of can get curious and try things on. You know, again, we believe that we have to be supported to find and follow individualized pathways and patchworks of recovery. And that means a lot of different things for women. We don't encourage anybody to explore their trauma without a professional. Whether that's intergenerational trauma or racial trauma, religious trauma. We are not trauma specialists, even though we try and create trauma-informed spaces, and Taryn teaches yoga teachers to deliver yoga or trauma-informed yoga. But I really do think it's just be curious, and first be curious. Do your kind of, well, what do I want to look at this or not? And if you don't. Like, you trust your instincts. Like if it's a big, scary thing, then maybe you're not ready to even be curious about it. But if you can land in a place of curiosity and go, again, our intuition knows. If your intuition's saying like, maybe there's something not healthy about this particular thing, what do I do next? I've been curious. I'm ready to admit that there's a little bit of a problem here. I'm not ready to say I'm going to do anything about it. I think your next step is to find a place where you can explore with others. So, the internal curiosity, and then kind of and I will tell you that our community, She Recovers, is a place where you can explore safely and without judgment. And give yourself a break. You don't make any big decisions. Just kind of take your time. There's an arc to it, right, Tina? There's an arc to recovery, and it looks a lot like this. Oh, wow, I have a problem. I'm going to do something about it. I swear to everybody in my life I'm doing something about it, but really I don't want to do anything about it. So now I feel like an idiot. And it just goes up and down. And that's okay. That's part of the arc. But the gentler arc is, this is your journey, and keep it close until you're ready to reach out, and then reach out to people that you think are safe. And Christina, I loved your post, and it was so beautiful, and it was so, you can see how it was resonating. You did it just beautifully. We talk about recovering out loud so that other women can find us, and what you did was just beautiful, and I loved it. Sorry, Tina, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Thank you, Dawn. And what you just said reminded me of what you said at the beginning that bears repeating, and you said, not this, right? And the other thing was that you don't have to hit rock bottom. Everybody's rock bottom is different, and that it's okay to decide this is where your bottom is, right? Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, for me, I was speaking at a conference, and this is actually what the final straw for me was. I was speaking at a conference, and I'd gone out drinking the night before, and I'd set an intention to be very risky, to go out, as Tina said, on the skinny branch. And I wanted to really push the envelope in my work. And I felt that I had been inspired to do that. But I'd gone drinking the night before. And when I showed up at the conference the next day, I was just a little bit on the foggy side. And I went into autopilot. And when I was done, I was like, I just went into, and I delivered the message that I always deliver. I didn't do anything. I did not follow what I knew in my gut was the right thing to do. And that was the turning point for me. And I was like, I don't want to live on autopilot anymore. And that was the switch. That was the toggle switch.
So I want to encourage us to move to the final question that we've chatted with Dawn about, and then give us some time for the wisdom circle. And I'm gonna dip into that next question, which is, I've asked Dawn to think about if there were, like, in all of her experience, if there were, you know, one or two sustainability practices that she is going to be pulling up front and center for the next 12 to 18 months. What might they be? And I'm hoping that each of the co-hosts have a chance to reflect on that or add one of their own. And if it's not, you know, using our voice, it's using the chat. And then in about 5 minutes, I'm going to stop our recording and open it up to the group.
Thanks, Charlene. Yeah, I gave quite a bit of thought to this because I do have various practices, but I wanted to kind of bucket them to be more helpful and less specific. And I loved, you know, I listened to last week's conversation about rest, and I have to say, as a recovering workaholic, there is an organization called Workaholics Anonymous, and they have a website called workaholicsanonymous.org. I've never been to a Workaholics Anonymous meeting, but I love their literature. And they have this beautiful piece of literature called The Gifts of Rest. And so one of my practices throughout all of time, I think, has been resting. So I would say I always start with I give myself the gift of rest. You know, that looks a lot like novels and naps for me in this. And I love that it's fall because, you know, I don't have to feel guilty about not going out in the beautiful sunshine. I can curl up with tea and a blanket and a novel and a nap. So rest is definitely the practice that is probably my number one practice. Sometimes while I'm resting, I guess the second practice would be self-reflection. And I wasn't sure if it was self-reflection or self-awareness because I see them as so closely related, but kind of the practice of checking in with myself. And I have to do that a lot right now because my life is in such transition, you know, from having She Recovers, which was a business, to now it's a foundation, and now I'm a volunteer, and now I don't have a living, and now I have to go get a job and do, you know, I have to go back to my work and those types of things. So I'm checking in a lot with what do I feel like I want to be doing come January when I have to start earning again. So kind of spending that time thinking about, I'm very fortunate because of CERB, thank you, Canadian government. I have till November to have to make a decision about what I need to do next, but still spending time dreaming and creating and being curious about what's next. And then the final thing, and again, this is something that is just something that I've really gotten quite good at, I have to say, and that is the practice of self-compassion. I give myself a lot of breaks. I am really self-forgiving. You know, I just don't beat on myself about very many things anymore. I had decades of it before and during recovery, and I'm 60. You know, when I turned 60, I decided I'm just going to be who I am, and I'm going to try and be the best version of that person, but I'm going to screw up just like I have for the last 60 years. And if I need to say sorry, I will, but I'm just really going to be gentle with myself. So I love getting old. I hope I get to be 90 because every year and decade is just cooler for me and, you know, brings me into a stronger version of myself. But the practice is for this time, especially this time. There's so much division and tragedy out there, and, you know, illness. And we already had an epidemic, you know, it was called the opioid epidemic. And so having everything else layered on it, you know, the search for social justice that there's just so much going on. It's a painful place. And I don't do things right all the time, and I forgive myself. So self-compassion, self-reflection, and lots of rest for this fall.
Love it. Christina, I'm going to swing over to you and then T and Sharon, and just as concisely as you can, what either reflecting on Dawn or your own, your number one sustainability practice that you're going to bring forward this fall?
For me, it's being very present in where I am, because oftentimes I'm so full in my head and there's so much going on, and sometimes like I'll be driving and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I gotta do this and this and this and this and this, and it's like, well, right now you're driving, so just drive. And the other thing, I'm going to add one more thing, and that is I have a little bit of a joy list. What gives me joy? And so I'm aware of those things that give me joy. And one of the things that I did last night was go back to my I'm singing again, which I haven't done for a long time. And so I had a music practice. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this, right? So reminding myself what gives me joy and doing that.
I'm going to jump on that because the word present was mine too. And it's something, Dawn, that you said about it's important to be physically, emotionally, and spiritually present right now. And I looked at that and I went, wow, I've got the physically, I've been working on that for a bit. I'm absolutely spiritually, my life leads that way. But emotionally, I can be present with the emotion, but I'm often not present as the emotion is moving through me. And it kind of runs the show sometimes. And so this is going to sound strange to many, but maybe not. My practice, oddly enough, as a woman, I feel like I can say this here, is actually Kegels. And in those moments when I am releasing, like doing a Kegel, like mindfully with breath, is when I feel my emotions taking over. I'm actually going to breathe and strengthen my core and my pelvic floor and see if I can integrate my beingness in that place through my emotions. So that's mine. Sharon, you're up.
Yeah, and same thing, being present. For me, when Elizabeth Gilbert said it, that really hit me. It struck me like wham, side of the head. During this time, this time, there is so much going on, as Dawn said. So on top of our own issues, our own trauma that we're dealing with, our own recovery, and we've got all this other stuff on the outside, being present is really important. But for me, more than that, it's following my intuition, my inner knowing, and really trying to stay with that, even when all this other stuff is happening. It's a difficult practice, but that's what I'm trying to do sustainably.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to thank Dawn personally for being with us, and we're going to close the official part of Gather for Her just in a couple of short minutes. I'm going to ask Tina to do our close. For me, the practice that I will keep top of mind is releasing what I do no longer need, releasing it with gratitude. Like Christina said, we wouldn't run a marathon with a backpack. We wouldn't run a marathon with a broken leg. We would allow ourselves some time to heal. But I also want to remind us of, as a little girl, I had a lot of fun and I was super good at the three-legged race. So there's something there. We might need to recover and we might need to heal, but when we buddy up in groups such as today, and we practice the old three-legged race, that's where we can also get some traction and have some fun. Over to you, T.
Juicy, beautiful conversation. So what I want you to know is that in this conversation, what you've just experienced really is our PowHERhouse FireCircle model. And in the model of collecting wisdom between us. And we're about to move into a bigger fire circle, which is our wisdom circle. And our fire circle model is how we gather our wisdom, and it's how we move forward collectively. It's what we're bringing to the table, our offering in this new world. And you'll probably notice that our fall campaign has just started. And that campaign is an invitation for you to ask yourself what you are ready for. So I just can't think of a better conversation than recovery around what are you ready for. So I'm gonna close this piece that we're in right now and invite you to lean into the house this fall as we all get ready together. And I'm going to show you, it's a 2-minute video from our campaign. And I want you to know that you can find it on YouTube, where it will likely have, might have a better, it doesn't have Zoom as the in-between. I just need to screen share. I forgot, hold on, screen share. And see if you can sit with, what are you ready for? All right, let's make this bigger. Oh, wrong one. Sharing is paused. Hold on. Resume share. Hold on, gang. I did it wrong. Let me go back to here. No, I may have messed it up. Oh, no. No, I may have. You know what? Oh, here it is. Here it is. Make this bigger. Okay. Oh, no, here it is. Okay, try it again. This happened last time. Haha. And I'm being compassionate with myself. All right.
We see you. We see all of you. The powerful leader you are and all you're here to become. Ready to expand as the world expands. Ready to realize and receive your greatest gifts. Are you ready now to step out in faith, beyond belief, out of the grind, the hustle, out of what has become uncomfortably comfortable, walking to the beat of a new drum, first steps on a new path where we return to our whole self and lead from there, where we expand and realize our human potential. First steps to more impact with less effort, greater ease, and yes, fun. There is a path, not the one we've been on, a path that calls us beyond our beliefs, far beyond this mess. Stepping out is scary, we know, but fear is a signal that expansion is right here, right here. What if we lived and led beyond belief, expanding to all that is possible? Ready for her, human expansion realized. Are you ready? Ready to realize? What are you ready for?